Welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. You know, desperately, Americans want peace and harmony. They really do. They want joy to the world. They want love, you know. That's really what the country wants. But the Democrats say, not on your life, we're not going to give you any love. We're going to have 75 different investigations of the White House. We've already determined who we're going after. And the Democrats' majority in the House keeps on growing. I said it's going to be closer to 40 seats before it's over. And that could mean that President Trump is going to be really he's going to be having the time of his life against it. And his greatest ally may be Nancy Pelosi. We just don't ever know what's going to happen.
Yeah, well, some in Congress are planning to investigate. They say that the Democrats are loading up what they're calling a subpoena cannon. And one former Trump advisor believes all this could actually help the president. CBN's Jenna Browder reports from Washington.
The subpoenas are coming for President Trump and his administration. As Democrats get ready to take control of the House, they are coming up with a long list of all the things they want to investigate.
We are not scattershot. We are not doing any investigation for a political purpose, but to seek the truth. So I think a word that you could describe about how Democrats will go forward in this regard is we will be very strategic.
House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, who hopes to take over as Speaker, says her party will be strategic. But some new signs suggest that may not be the case. Axios reports Democrats are loading a subpoena cannon with a list of at least 85 investigations they want to pursue.
Well, I think the Democrats are very much at risk of overplaying their hand here. I think the American people are going to suffer from investigation fatigue.
Stephen Moore, an economist with the Heritage Foundation and former Trump economic advisor, tells CBN News he's actually glad Democrats will have control of the House.
I was kind of quietly hoping that Democrats would take the House and the Republicans would keep the Senate, because I felt like if Republicans controlled every lever of power going into the 2020 election and anything goes wrong, then what party would you possibly have to blame but the Republicans? Now, if things go wrong, you know, Trump can say, look, it's because the Pelosi Democrats are blocking what I'm trying to do.
The Axios list covers just about everyone and everything close to Trump from day one of his presidency. Many Democrats are talking about impeachment, as the incoming House Oversight Chairman, Representative Jerry Nadler, would be in charge of that. But he says his #1 priority is Robert Mueller's Russia investigation.
Right now, our top priority is to protect the Mueller investigation, to protect the integrity of that investigation from the White House attempt to stifle it and to interfere with it.
The man in charge of the investigation, Acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker, will be among the first called to testify.
We will make sure that Matt Whitaker immediately, one of our first orders of business will be to invite him, and if necessary, to subpoena him to appear before the committee.
It does violence to the Constitution and the vision of our founders to appoint such a person in such a manner to be the chief legal officer in our country.
And you can count on a fight from the White House. President Trump says he's ready to take on a warlike posture and launch investigations into the Democrats. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
At the beginning of this show, I misspoke. I said 75. It's going to be 85 targets. And they're talking about preserving the integrity of the Mueller investigation. Well, I want you to know, ladies and gentlemen, that interrogatories have been received from the special prosecutor. The president has given answers through his legal team to the special prosecutor. He has taken thousands of pages of testimony, hours and hours of discussion, and, as I say, an enormous amount of material. And he must wrap it up, and I think that it's going to be wrapped up, frankly, before the end of this year, because there's no more he could do. There's no there. There was no political corruption, no relationship with the Russians. This whole thing is nothing but a hoax that was started a long time ago by a phony dossier that came out of England, and there was no collusion. And that was what he was charged to do. All right, and the Justice Department has just said that the appointment of this new Attorney General is absolutely legal, absolutely appropriate according to the law. There's no problem with that. So do we want a nation that is totally divided and people yelling at each other for the next 3 years? That'll be horrible. We can't conceive of it. And why would the Democrats want to do that? Do they want to go on the record as being the chief opposers? What is their plan? Let them give forth a plan. Here's how we're going to make America good and great and a nice place to live. Well, our chief political analyst, David Brody, is joining us now. And, David, I understand Nancy Pelosi is facing a strong challenge for Speaker. What do you think of that?
That's right, Pat. You know, we've talked a lot, or there's been a lot of talk about Republicans having some issues as it relates to Trump and certain factions within the Republican Party. The Democrats are having a devil of a time trying to get their act together, and we may see it play out in January when the Speaker of the House is elected. Nancy Pelosi is expected to be the Speaker, but she needs 218 votes. And right now, at least, when we're talking right at this moment, there are about 232 Democrats. So that means, if I do the math, 232 minus 218 means she can only lose 14 Democrats. Right now, it seems like at least 17 Democrats are opposed to her. They have actually come out and said, I'm not voting for her. So that's a problem. She can only lose 14 of those 17. We'll see. Times have a way of kind of ironing all of this out. But there is going to be a letter sent in the next couple of weeks by some of these disgruntled Democrats who are against Pelosi saying, we don't want her to be Speaker. That'll be the story going forward, Pat.
Well, they've got to have somebody against her. Who is the somebody do you think is going to would be the focal point of that opposition?
Well, they're having a hard time trying to figure that out. There's been talk of a woman named Martha Fudge, possibly Congressman Martha Fudge. But at this point, you know, they don't really know. And that's a big part of the problem.
Do you agree with Steve Moore that it could be a good thing with the Republicans, the Democrats control the House?
I definitely agree with Steve on that point, for sure, as it relates to, look, if things bog down in Washington, at least it's not all Trump's fault, right? I mean, in other words, it's not just the Republican Party controlling both the House, the Senate, and the White House. That's true. I also think that, basically, Donald Trump needs a foil, and Nancy Pelosi, the Democrats, the House of Representatives controlled by the Democrats, will be a wonderful foil politically for him in 2020. Here's part of the problem here. With all of these investigations that Jenna was talking about in the piece earlier, here's the issue. We know, for example, with the Benghazi hearings that came up, all of that investigation that went on during the Obama administration, well, what came out of that? Well, the Hillary Clinton email server. That was the whole big talk out of that Benghazi hearing. So, look, if there are a lot of different investigations going on here with Trump and we have new information that comes out, well, that's not just fodder for Democrats. It's fodder for the media. It'll play into 2020 and could affect Donald Trump's reelection chances.
Well, it looks like, by the way, that the Democrats have performed better than we anticipated. My count is that they might win as many as 40 seats in the House. Well, what do you think happened?
Well, there are a lot of things that happened. I mean, it wasn't technically a blue wave, but it was pretty close to a blue wave. And I mean, look in the Senate, for example, they could be in an even draw. I mean, if Florida, for some reason, goes to Bill Nelson, and that's a whole nother Oigavolt moment. But if that's the case, it could be 51-48. Or basically 51-49, if you will, and we're back to where we started again. And why? Well, look, Arizona, which we thought at the time was going to go to the Republican Martha McSally, ended up going to Kyrsten Sinema. And of course, Democrats haven't voted for a Democrat senator in Arizona in 30 years, but that state is going more purple. So there's a demographics issue that Republicans have. There's obviously a suburban independent women issue that Republicans have as well. And as for Jon Tester in Montana, that was the other one Republicans were hoping to get. Matt Rosendale ultimately wasn't that great of a candidate, and Jon Tester was actually well liked in Montana, despite the fact that Donald Trump and Mike Pence tried to go out there quite a bit and beat him.
The suburban women saying that Donald Trump reminds them of their first husband, and that is not a good thing. What's he going to do to get those suburban women back?
Look, I think the train has left the station on this. In other words, here's the answer. The answer is he has to be calmer on the Twitter feed and not be so bombastic. And I say, ha, 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 Good luck with that. That's not going to happen, Pat. You and I know it. So they're going to have a suburban woman problem. And so that is what suburban independent want. They don't necessarily mind the policies necessarily. They actually kind of like the policies. It's the rhetoric from Donald Trump. It's just not going to change. He's a New Yorker through and through. Not happening. Now, as it relates to evangelical women, 77% of evangelical women actually support Donald Trump. But here's the issue. What about that other 23%? Look, 23% of white evangelical women in this country, many of them in the suburbs, either somewhat approve or somewhat disapprove of Donald Trump. This is the issue for Donald Trump in 2020. Everybody talked about those evangelicals going for Donald Trump, and 81% voted for him in 2016. The problem is if he doesn't win some of those white evangelical women in the suburbs over in 2020, that 81% could go down to, let's say, 79% or so, and that will not get him elected into a second term.
If you were sitting in the White House saying, Donald, here's what I want to advise you, what would you tell him to do to win those women?
Well, Pat, that is a tricky question. I can't give advice. I'm just a journalist. I play one on television. I really am a journalist. Look, I think, though, Pat, what I just said, they may want to rewind the tape and actually listen to what I just said, because it's not advice. It's analysis, and it's true. They've got to figure out what they're going to do in the suburbs, and the way they've got to do it is somehow tone down the rhetoric, though we know that's not going to happen. So they can talk about policies all they want, but at some point, they've got to figure out a way to bring those evangelical women back into the fold.
They've got Hispanics even in Florida, and he appeals to them, say, do you want to make this like Nicaragua? They get the message. But you've got people in Nevada, you've got people in Arizona, you've got people in New Mexico, you've got people in California, you've got them in Texas. You have so many Hispanics, and what has he done to turn them against him? They really, that's what that vote signifies. It seems like to me that McSally lost in Arizona and so forth. I mean, those Hispanics are voting against Donald Trump.
Well, here's the thing. I think it's broader than that, Pat. I think you can make the argument that Hispanics have unfortunately voted, if you're a Republican, unfortunately voted against the Republican Party based on one issue, and that's immigration. It's really that simple. And when a state goes more purple, that's what's going to happen. I mean, look, we know what the Hispanic community is all about. They are pro-family, their family, the culture. It's so important to Hispanic families all across the country, but they get tripped up. I say they get tripped up. They have an issue with this one issue, immigration. It has played big time in Nevada, big time in Arizona, to a degree in Texas. Why did Ted Cruz have such a hard time? The candidate there was impressive, but at the same time, Texas too. So we're seeing this all over the country, and I think we're going to have to wait to see how that plays out.
David, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, I really appreciate what the president is doing. I mean, the evangelicals were strongly for him, but there's some warning signs, and I just really believe that he's got to be aware of what's there. And, you know, as those who would counsel the president, you know, we've really got to change course and recognize these suburban women and these Hispanic people. It's going to be costly unless we change some of the tone and the rhetoric.
Yeah, well, it remains to be seen whether that can happen or not, you know, when it's bone deep. I'm not sure it can. Well.